Okay, the next question comes from a great nation to our south. It comes from Mexico. The questioner is a Mexican senator. It is Alfonso Elias Serrano from Sonora, who recently spoke at a LIM event in the Mexican Congress on NOAPA and the Pleno. And he says to Lynn, next year, we Americans will elect 500 congressmen, 128 senators, and a president of the republic. With about a year to go before the political campaigns begin, there is a great deal of talk about who the candidates will be, but there's very little discussion about the vision and the projects that the country needs in the future. Therefore, I would like to ask you the following. Leaving aside all questions of party and personality, what do you believe are the central themes that candidates must focus on in 2012? What are the public policies which the candidates should address in their campaigns in order to increase investment and employment in the country? And finally, what changes should the candidates promote in the political, trade, and economic relationship between Mexico and the United States?
My policies for Mexico have not changed significantly since my discussions of these matters with the then President Lopez Portillo. And the program which we had discussed with Lopez Portillo and with the leading members of the PRI in particular at that time are the same program we need today. What Lopez Portillo was planning to do was, first of all, to commit Mexico to developing 10 nuclear reactors for the purpose of changing the character of the territory of Mexico. That is, not only to supply power inwardly, but to supply sufficient levels of power that the virtually uninhabitable, for productive reasons, of the coastal areas of Mexico could be made habitable if we had enough engineering in terms of nuclear power to make these coastal regions functionally habitable by the people. And if we develop the systems to bring water into the heart of northern Mexico to enable agriculture to flourish in an area which is largely desert. And at that point, if that had been allowed to go ahead, as Lopez Portillo was actually implementing it in August and September of that year, would have succeeded. This was crushed by a British initiative which enlisted the support of the government of the United States. Mexico was crushed by British direction, in which the American figure, key American, was Henry Kissinger, who played a key role in this process of butchering Mexico. Mexico is now afflicted with a great drug problem, a loss of lots of things which were destroyed. The period since then, since September of that year, the destruction, 1982 on, the destruction of the people and culture of Mexico is that. What we have is a few people who are either my age or somewhat younger, who were significant figures in their potential in Mexico back in '82. These people represent the seeds of recreation of what the intention for Mexico should be. And we had then the prospect of an alliance until it was broken up, in which I designed this program of recovery to extend throughout Central and South America, which I thought was the proper mission of the United States to assist in making this possible. It was to bring together, we had three presidents, or three leaders: the president of Mexico, the president of Brazil, and the honcho of Argentina at the same time. These three presidents, or equivalent, had agreed on a mission orientation of this type. And it was great outside pressure, led by the British Empire, with complicity by people in the United States, to crush these developments. And therefore, I don't say we can go back to the past. We can't. But we can take our experience from the past, knowing what was right then, and judging how we can do that which was right then, now, under present circumstances. My view now is that the development of Mexico depends upon the immediate installation of a great reform in the United States. And the reform is as follows. By implementing what's called the Glass-Steagall reform, which is absolutely essential to anything good ever happening to Mexico within foreseeable future. Without the Glass-Steagall reform, Mexico is doomed. There's nothing you can do about it. The Glass-Steagall measure must go through. The Glass-Steagall measure would take all those junk debts, those approximately $15 trillion of front junk debt accumulated by criminals since a few years ago, since 2008. That junk debt, by the simple enactment of Glass-Steagall, which is a law which implements a principle of our federal Constitution, would take all that junk debt and say, buddy, it's all yours. It's not ours. Now, what that means is we would go back to a fixed exchange rate system in principle. That is, we would go back to a Roosevelt standard, Franklin Roosevelt standard, which he had intended for the post-war period. And that would be the system we'd operate on. We would proffer to nations of Europe and other nations cooperation on behalf of that kind of reform among nations, as relations among nations. China would be happy to have that agreement. India would probably be happy with some qualifications with that arrangement. Other nations. It would save Western Europe. So, for example, take Germany as an example of how this works. Germany is not a nation which is known for its natural resources as such, especially mineral resources. It depends upon other countries. Well, there are areas in South America, there are areas in Africa we can develop. You have a project for the Chad area, Lake Chad area, rebuild it. A European project with the aid of nuclear power. We can bring the excess water from the Congo, which is just going into the Atlantic Ocean, South Atlantic. People in the Congo will never miss it. It's going out to the sea anyway. We take some of that water, we take it over the mountains into the area of the northern part of Africa, into the Lake Chad area, which is a natural lake. We pump this stuff over there, and suddenly you have changed the character of the nation of Chad by this kind of project, with a combination of nuclear power and engineering of water projects. It's true throughout much of the world. In the case of Mexico, the NUAPA project, which would, if installed, and would be installed under NUAPA, under the Glass-Steagall reform, that project would create immediately, directly, 4 million jobs in the United States. We largely, more or less, high-skilled jobs. These are high-skilled engineering projects. However, to support that project, which involves 4 million people, according to the engineering study done for it, would take another 3 million more people from areas such as the area of the United States, from the Atlantic coast up to Salt Lake City along the northern coast, which is the old engineering section of the United States. That section would have to build the railroads, the magnetic levitation systems and so forth, which are necessary to build the NUAPA project, which is one of the greatest engineering projects ever attempted by mankind on this planet. It would change the character of the climate, the fertility of the United States. It would be a stimulation to the development of the potentiality of the Siberian section of Russia, which contains a great amount of raw materials underneath very difficult territory, which my friends in the Vernadsky Institute in Moscow know how to deal with. We would develop a Bering Strait tunnel railway system connection between Alaska and Siberia. The Russians would develop a rail system to connect the existing rail system, Trans-Siberian, into this junction point. This would then be used as a device for going into these territories in northern Siberia, a very much unpopulated region, to locate and develop the mineral resources which are desperately needed for the development of countries to the south of Siberia, such as China and into India. So therefore, a cooperative development of the territory of this part of Asia with this kind of cooperation, with these kinds of projects, is required for the future of a hungry Asia, among other things. And this means, again, you're going to enlist the potential, productive potential of Germany, of other countries in Europe, to participate in this. So what we need is a fixed exchange rate credit system based on long-term credit of a credit system type, which will enable us to move credit around from area to area on support of projects of common interest among nations. That is, we want and need the successful development of Siberia for the benefit of people south of Siberia. We will have to supply some of the facilities to assist Russia in doing its part in that job and other nations, and insisting China to buy a more free attitude on technology with China so they can do these things. We have to do the same thing with South America. We have to do the same thing with Mexico. The same kind of system. We need a global understanding of the kind that Franklin Roosevelt was struggling to define at the time he died for the post-war period. We need a global system which, as de Gaulle once said later, a Europe from the Atlantic to the Urals. We need a system of sovereign nations around the world which are cooperating with a fixed exchange rate credit system, not a monetary system, but a credit system, in order for the mission orientation of developing those projects which are indeed the common aims of mankind. We have different languages, we have different cultures, but for mankind as a species, we have a common aim. And it's a common aim that reaches beyond Earth itself into what we can do in our neighboring territory of the solar system. You know, we got several billion years from now, the sun's going to be intolerable. We can't live there anymore. So we better do something now about that while we still have the time left to our hands to take that job on. You probably have to build a new Ireland someplace out there in space. But that's not a big problem, somewhere in the galaxy. You know. But it's that kind of mission orientation which must be shared among the thoughtful representatives of leadership of various nations. That commitment to those kinds of projects and intentions, which we can physically put into effect immediately. We cannot put the benefits entirely into effect immediately, but we can put the commitment and the starting the program into effect immediately. A change within the relations among the peoples of mankind, based on the sovereign nation state and its culture, and cooperation with the common aims of mankind. And that's not really so difficult. It's not so difficult. It's getting the old system out of the way is the problem, including the British Empire. And we've been dominated by Roman-style European empires ever since the future emperor, Caesar, was having a strange relationship in the Isle of Capri with the cult of, based on the old Persian cult. And they created an empire, which is an empire of monetarism. And the way the monetary system worked, as it still does today, as the British Empire works today, it works by killing off, assassinating, abusing, doing similar things to various nations which are caught within the orbit of that empire. The empire is a monetary system which imposes the rule by money, controlled by an empire, a monetary system, a rule of money over nations and peoples, and the use of the rule of money to control and even to destroy people who become subjects of that rule of money. We have to create a worldwide credit system among nations in which the states create credit for those projects which are necessary for their own peoples or for their assistance of another people. And by basing the credit on what is feasible scientifically and otherwise, we no longer gamble on profits. We now invest in the development of mankind and the encouragement of those people who are able to show that they're capable of making a contribution to these necessary scientific and other benefits for mankind. But we have to have the idea of the sovereignty of the nation state, the sovereignty of the people. And the case of Mexico is exactly that. If we in the United States adopt the right policy, and we have an agreement among nations in our neighborhood, we could immediately return to the intention, which is my commitment with President Lopez Portillo of Mexico and others, leaders of South America and so forth at that time. We can do it. The job is more difficult now than then because so much ruin has happened, including the abuse and conditions of life of the people. The Mexican people are not as good condition as they were back in 1982. They've lost a lot. We're going to have to fix it, and that's going to take some time. But we can start the fixing right away.